Welcome to our Design Her In campaign. For International Women's Day, we are discussing designing him in. So the steps that we need to take to accelerate gender equality by factoring him into the conversation. The reason why we find this important is in the Global Gender Gap Report that came out over the past 2 years, it had a lot of areas where women should adapt and change to be designed into the workforce. This was women should have training to different digital skill sets, and also women should act as role models and leadership. We at Speak Out were thinking about what men could do to help accelerate this gap in the workplace. So, Marie, I'm going to share a statistic with you, and this is one that hit hard for me, and this is what I think we need to start to talk about.
Okay, so can I just make it clear that I haven't heard any of this before? So
yep. So I'm bringing Marie in blind to this conversation and keen to hear her thoughts. So from the UK National Centre of Social Research in 2019 did a survey across the UK. This survey said that 72% of participants disagreed that women should stay at home, but this does mean that 28% of people across the UK who were captured in this survey still think that women's place is in the house.
And that data that was gathered, did they gender disaggregate the data and say whose views they were predominantly coming from?
We could include that in the post.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know, because I can't imagine 28% of the women that I know saying that they think the woman's place is in the home. I can imagine them saying they want to go to work. So that would be interesting to understand if there's a difference in how men and women are thinking across the UK.
I think it's also a generation as well, because definitely the old generation who were stay at home and their parents were, their mothers were, would probably fall into this category. So I do think it could be 28% of women across the board.
Yeah,
I just have our demographic.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like thinking about my own mum, she found it very, very, and I think she still does, very, very odd that Paul would take shared parental leave, and that because he took 3 months off when I wanted him to take longer. He took 3 months off to look after Arthur. And my mum, still to this day, she's like, Paul is such a good one. You should keep him. You should keep him. And I'm like, it's his child as well. Like, he wants to look after him. Like, this is not something special. But I guess from my mum's generation, that's just unheard of. Absolutely. And my mum didn't work right when mum didn't work when me and my brother were young. So like her value set's completely different.
I completely agree with you. There is a generational thing, and there is still a culture of if a dad's taking their child to the park, they are babysitting, not parenting, and it's seen as a like hands up amazing father move, but it's just expected from the mother. So I think that mentality does need to change for us to really have gender equality, because men do want to be fathers as well. Men do want to stay at home.
And so I completely agree. And I think we perpetuate this. I think the UK perpetuates it in the legislation that we currently have. If you look at what men and women are paid, like we have massive inequality in parental leave or paid parental leave within the UK, purely discriminated by your sex. If you're a woman, you get much longer for statutory maternity pay than if you're a man. And so the country itself is reinforcing like this consciousness. And then you see it cascading down to organizations as well, where there's massive differences in the enhancement on maternity pay compared to paternity pay within companies. So everyone's reinforcing this view that women should stay at home and look after their children and men should go to work.
Shared parental leave was brought in to try and address this. However, it doesn't work. It's been there for 5 years, and only 2% of eligible men in that 5 years take it up. 2%. And that's ridiculously low. And there is clearly a blocker to doing that. The law needs to change and address that.
Yeah, I think that although to someone who's never taken shared parental leave, they would think like, oh, that's fantastic. Like men and women have equality when it comes to staying at home with their children. But the people that have used shared parental leave, myself, included. And studies show as well, like the way that it's set up in the UK, it essentially, if you look at countries that have done this around Europe, because it's an optional, you can split it between men and women. Typically, women will take more of that parental leave period. And I think even in my case as well, mine and Paul's case, there's a massive financial penalty to Paul taking time off, which factored into the decision making, because my maternity was enhanced, but he didn't get any enhancement of his paternity leave. He had 2 weeks. So any time that he would take off in shared parental leave, he would be on like the statutory minimum pay, which is massively different to his normal pay. So it meant that it wasn't really a free choice. It was massively constrained by the financial side of things.
I think there are massive unseen barriers for men taking the time, because I'm shocked to see only 1 in 3 men take even paternity leave. So that's the 2 weeks off after your child is born, and only 1 in 3 is so low.
Yeah. Do you know what? And we see this in the survey, actually. We see this in the responses to the Speak Out survey from men. Men get a lot of unfair treatment associated with wanting to take time off to care for their children. And we have specific reports of harassment and bullying driven by the desire to take shared parental leave or time off looking after their children in their early years. So I can appreciate it. Like, I can see why at the extreme that would mean that men didn't take paternity leave, not because they don't want to, but because they're in a culture that says that it isn't acceptable.
Yeah, I think this then comes on to, and it definitely does contribute to, the part-time working. And from the research that I've seen, part-time working is one of the biggest barriers for equal pay, because it's predominantly women who take the part-time working and have the lower pay gaps. So the stats that I found were 3 in 10 mothers said that they reduce their working hours, whereas only 1 in 20 dads reduce theirs.
So it's really interesting, and I can see why it happens, right? Because I know of women who, when they apply for part-time working, have to give massive justifications. Like, you literally have to have like your whole family dying and 7 children. And like, even then employers are resistant to it for some reason. So I can really see that, because there is this view that women are the primary caregivers, it's hard for men to negotiate that part-time working or even feel comfortable suggesting or asking for it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely, because we've seen throughout our survey and through the barriers that we're discussing this month that part-time working and flexible working is not really where it needs to be in society for women to take the time off. That's why we see women leave the engineering sector and become project managers, because it's a much more flexible area to be in. And if that's a barrier for women who are expected to sort of be the child rearer people, then men must have the even bigger barrier to say, I want that time off, I want to spend time with my children, which it shouldn't be, but it's because it's ingrained in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, though, like, I totally agree. Part-time working and flexible working is, I would say, an absolute joke, as in like the way in which it's embraced and exploited for people, and it disproportionately impacts women, I would say, and forces them out of the workforce. That's what we're seeing in the survey. I think times are changing, so for example, Paul, who is white male software developer. So he was looking at jobs the other day, and he basically said to me, I scrolled past everything that didn't show the salary and everything that didn't scream flexible, remote and part-time working. And he's like, I'm not going to go and work full-time, like 9 to 5 in an office. There's no way I'm doing it. And I think he's probably doing more for gender equality than I ever could, because that's the part of the workforce that companies have relied on, doing the work for them. And And what it seems like is our generation is saying, we're not going to do that anymore. Like, we need more options. So I'm excited for change. I think it's coming.
Yeah, definitely. I was disappointed yesterday when I was looking at a female empowerment organisation for STEM, so getting women into STEM, and they were advertising for 4 new roles. All of them were full-time and would be based in London once remote working stopped. And I just could not believe an organisation like that, which was empowering women to enter the field, were not providing flexible working. It wasn't even advertised. And that's disappointing. We've not come far enough if that's what that type of organisation is providing.
I mean, it's an absolute joke, I think. Like, it really irritates me when I hear organizations say, oh, we're such an inclusive organization. We're pro gender equality. We're doing loads of things for women. And I'm like, every job advert you have out says full-time working fixed location. I'm like, you literally screen out so many women and people with invisible and maybe visible disabilities just on that alone. Like, they won't apply. And they're like, oh no, we're really inclusive. Well, we definitely discuss flexible working if that was, if that was a need of the person applying. And I'm like, I wouldn't apply for that job. Like, I'm not going to go through the process of applying for your job to try and negotiate part-time working. It needs to be like, you need to be advertising it up front, because I'm just not going to apply. If not, I'll go and apply for the next job.
Let's bring it back to Design Him In. And so we're discussing the barriers that women face, that we can't always work part-time, part-time's not offered, flexible working's not offered. And then with maternity package, I know we're going to discuss this month about coming back into the workplace. So I want to open it up and ask what barriers there are for men, because there clearly are barriers. And I'd love to understand from men's point of view what they find barriers are. One of the key aspects, I think, is just the way culture is set up, and that we have loads of mummies clubs and Mumsnet. However, that's not helpful. That's perpetuating the issue. Yeah, it's good that you're there to share problems and discuss things. However, if men feel awkward walking into the room, I understand it's the same issue that we've had for generations. I walk into so many meetings and I'm the only woman. But you know how awkward you feel when you do that. So the men walking into the mummies clubs with the baby and then being singled out for being the only man is not okay either, because we want to enable that to happen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the structural things that we've talked about, the inequality and enhanced parental pay between men and women, the inability for men to ask for and gain part-time working arrangements just like women would, all of these things mean that the men that do get those things are outliers. And so I think what we need to do is remove the systemic barriers to men making the choice of doing these things, as opposed to being forced into a particular choice or nudged in a particular direction. And then that's when the demographics will start to shift. And then we'll see changes in the way in which organizations tailor their content or their services to men and women. And I think it will become more, it'll become less gender disaggregated almost.
And I do think it will take time, but everything does take time. And it's just enabling men to feel comfortable to do that and setting up the benefits and the laws to allow them to do that. So I suppose this topic and conversation that we're having is calling for the shared parental leave and paternity leave and maternity leave to change in the UK, to allow for gender equality to be accelerated, because at the moment it is causing us to stall. And that's actually one of the things that are the barriers for us having full gender equality in the UK.
I think it is almost fundamental. Like, in all of the workshops that I've run with the Women's Infrastructure Network, in all of the conversations that I have with like key people, I always say, like, what's the one thing that you think needs to change that would have the most significant impact? And everybody always comes down, everyone always kind of says it around the topic of, we need more men involved in the home. And one of the ways that we can do that is by having equality within parental packages, because we've got massive, like, how can we can't expect to have gender equality in the workplace while we have massive inequality in the way in which we expect people to raise and care for their children. It's just not going to work. Like, simple.
Yeah, and I think when companies advertise that they've got great maternity packages, they need to start stepping up the paternity game because they are discriminating.
So I don't know, like, the legal definitely. I don't have a legal background, but you know, when I look at how I would describe what happens with enhanced paternity and maternity pay, it's literally parental pay, and the only discriminating factor based on how much you get is your gender or sex. And I'm like, is that not discrimination in itself? Like, what is this about? And so, yeah, I'm just not taking organizations seriously anymore that say that they care about gender equality, they care about being inclusive, when they have inequality in their enhanced maternity and paternity packages. I think organizations need to shift towards a parental package that is across the board for men, women, whether you're gay, straight, whether you adopt, whether you're a surrogate, whatever it is, so that everybody has equal access to equal enhanced pay when it comes to raising children. I guess one thing that I'm really interested in, we see a lot of responses coming into the Speak Out survey from women across the engineering sector. I'd say I think about 20 or 25% of our responses are from men. I would be very interested to hear from more men to understand what the barriers are to them participating in the workforce. Because I think that the conversation is, like, when we talk about gender equality, the conversation is predominantly about women. And I think we can't achieve true gender equality unless we consider this an ecosystem between men and women. And there are barriers to men as well that influence female participation in the workplace. So I really want to understand what those are. So just if you are a man and have worked in a toxic culture or with difficult people, please complete the Speak Out survey.
Yeah, and I think one of the big aspects here is we need to design her in to the workforce, but we need to design him into the home to allow him to have that time and the more work-life balance.
Absolutely.
Today we've discussed Design Him In as part of our Design Her In campaign. We would love to hear the barriers that you face and what needs to be addressed in the workplace to allow for gender equality to be accelerated.